Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by a guest who has been here before to talk about his fascinating book and research, and he's here back today to talk about how he has developed that research even further. So welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your new book, please?
Sure. Hi, Jen. I'm Mike Virgintino, a Syosset resident for about 30-odd years, but originally from the Bronx. And my second book is an interesting title. It plays off the first book. The second book is FREEDOMLAND U.S.A, More Definitive History, because the first one was the definitive history. But we found a lot more for book two.
That's so interesting. I'm so excited to talk about the new book, but let's remind our listeners first about the first book. I'd love to, if you could recap just sort of the story of FREEDOMLAND USA for our new listeners and what it was like to develop that project.
Sure. FREEDOMLAND USA was an American history theme park in the Bronx. And those of your listeners who are familiar with the Bronx and know where Co-op City is today, off the Hutchinson River Parkway and New England Thruway. Well, that was the site of this theme park. It operated from 1960 to 1964, so 5 full seasons. It was created and built by a fellow by the name of C.V. Wood, who originally handled the feasibility study for Disneyland, and then became Disneyland's first employee as he helped Walt and Roy Disney build their park. Well, they had a falling out several months after Disneyland opened, and he went out on his own. And at that time, a lot of entrepreneurs and investors around the country saw the success that the Disney brothers were having with Disneyland. Now we're talking 1955, 1956. And they thought, why can't we put a park in our neck of the woods? And why not hire C.V. Wood and his new company to build it, since he did so much for Disneyland? Now, you might originally ask, well, you have Disneyland. What would these investors and entrepreneurs think they could be as successful as Disneyland, with everybody flocking to California? Well, think of the timeline or the time period. People were not flocking to California. My parents, I was born in the 50s, raised in the 60s. My parents were not driving cross country from New York. They were, at that time, were not putting a family on the plane. It was just too expensive to do that. So Disneyland at that time, until about maybe 1965, 66, was actually drawing from about 100-mile radius, a driving radius around the park. They were not drawing people from New York, from Chicago, from Texas. They were just not going there. So these entrepreneurs said, let's put one in our neck of the woods. And they hired C.V. Wood and the company he created, and he was helping build parks across the country. And he built several of them. Many more were in blueprint form, but never got built because money dried up. Investors didn't sell stock as they should have, or didn't make the money on stock. So others weren't built. One still exists, and that's Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington, and that is a C.V. Wood park. But that opened just a year after FREEDOMLAND opened in New York. So I grew up in the Bronx, right outside of FREEDOMLAND. So my parents would take me there, but I would see it even in the off season when the park was closed, because walking to school, walking to church, you look down the side streets and you could look right down into the park. And even on days when I wasn't there, at night, I could hear the train whistles. Over the summer, I would see the fireworks from my bedroom window. So the park was with me constantly. Well, I realized that Freedomland, being an American history theme park, and one of the few that have ever been built anywhere in the world based on any kind of history, um, I realized the park sparked my interest at such a young age in American history. Because a couple of years after seeing the Civil War attraction of Freedomland, my parents took me on summer vacation, end of July, beginning of August, and one of those years we went to Gettysburg. And I can recall to this day my father saying to me, because I did not know what Gettysburg was, and he said, "You enjoyed the Civil War attraction at Freedomland. We're going to see where it actually happened." And when I got to Gettysburg, it was just the connection. So I got really into history. I'm a past president of the Civil War Roundtable of New York City. I'm involved with a lot of historic sites, and having been professionally a broadcaster, a writer, a researcher, and in public relations, I donate a lot of my time to historic sites to help them raise funds, preserve historic sites. So I've been very involved for over 40 years in that area. But it was Freedomland that gave me that spark so many years ago. So about 2013 or so, with the rise of Facebook. Now, I had written some articles, magazine articles about Freedomland, but now you're getting into the rise of Facebook and social media, online publications versus just print newspapers and magazines. And though I had written several articles, I'm noticing on Facebook pages about various areas of the Bronx. I'm noticing pages about Palisades Amusement Park, New Jersey, Coney Island, other old parks that we call trolley parks, the original parks that were at the end of trolley lines in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So I'm seeing historic pages, and I noticed there was nothing for Freedomland. So I said, well, let me start something for Freedomland. And I decided in the beginnings, when maybe I was posting only once or twice a week because I was looking for information, I decided I'm just not going to post a photograph and say, remember this attraction. I wanted to find out who created the attraction. What was the story behind it? How did they come up with that narrative for that historic attraction? And that's what started building. Fast forward a few years, about 2016, 17, and a friend of mine who was a newspaper editor at the Staten Island Advance, was a daily paper on Staten Island. He was a huge Disney buff, and he was also a travel writer for the paper, wrote a lot about the Disney parks. And he said, I'm writing a book. I'm writing a book on the connections among Disneyland, Walt Disney World, the New York World's Fair, and Freedomland. Because he had been to all of them as a child, a teenager. And he said, Mike, I know you know a lot about Freedomland. He goes, can I interview you for the book? Yes, of course. So we talk about Freedomland. He turns the manuscript in, and the publisher comes back to him and says, you need to have someone write a foreword for the book. Do you have anyone in mind? And he says, yeah, the guy who I interviewed for Freedomland, I think would be willing to do it. So I write the foreword. He loved it. The publisher loved it. He said, you just hit the target with this foreword. And he asked my friend, he goes, how much does he really know about Freedomland? Do you think he has a book in him? Not knowing that I had done the Facebook page, that I had been in broadcasting PR and I was a writer, I could do interviews, and I jumped at the chance. So that's how the first book came about. And I thought, when I wrote that book, I thought everything that was possibly could be found about Freedomland had been found. And the reason I say that is several. The original records, almost all of them, I would say 99.8% of them, were long ago destroyed. When the park was raised, a lot of things got destroyed. Second, the key people you wanted to talk to for such a book or for such a history are no longer with us. They were, I'm going to the park when I'm 8, 9, 10, these people are 35, 40, 45 years old. They're long gone. So I couldn't rely on that. I was lucky to find a couple of employees who existed, one in management, two of the character actors who are now, the fellow in management, he left us a couple of years ago, but he was in his 80s at the time of my first book. And he looked over my first book to make sure that everything was accurate based on his memory of it. And the two character actors who are now in their 70s and they're still with us. But I thought I had everything. And I used, luckily, a lot of newspapers have been digitized. So I could go back and look at newspapers from the late 50s, early 60s, not only New York, but around the world. Freedomland did get attention around the world. One newspaper I found in Russia, so I had to have someone who knew Russian to translate it for me. Nikita Khrushchev, who was in charge of Russia during the Cuban Missile Crisis and went toe to toe with JFK. He wanted to visit when he came here for the UN sessions. He wanted to visit Disneyland and Freedomland, because both of them had futuristic areas on technology and space flight. Well, the Defense Department said no. But I found that little blurb in a Russian newspaper from 1963.
Wow.
So the digitizing of newspapers was just an overwhelming importance to the research. So we put this all together. I was able to do some interviews with TV show host Chuck McCann, Sonny Fox, a few who were still with us at the time, who had memories. Some of the entertainers, Bobby Rydell, I spoke with, Paul Anka, the Lennon sisters. Kathy Lennon of the Lennon sisters provided me time of 3 hours on the phone. She remembered being at Freedomland like it was yesterday. And the Lennon sisters, we know of them, of these wonderful personalities of the family, the squeaky clean, the singers. They are Kathy was a million times more wonderful than you see on TV.
Wow.
And she even sent me from their personal album 25 photos of them at the park. And she said, just put them up on social media. Just say it's us. That's how wonderful they were. So I had thought everything you could possibly find had been found. The first book is published. We received some media attention for it. And all of a sudden, everyone came out of the woodwork. And the second book, besides more in-depth research about the attractions and the people behind the management, et cetera, and some of the entertainers, I have interviews with about 100 employees who I didn't know existed, as well as some who may not have been around, with their children who remembered it very well, because they were young children who their parents brought to the park when they weren't working at the park. So the second book fills in a lot of the gaps, because you're talking with people who either from management, from someone who may have been a secretary to the president of the park. You're talking to people in food service at all the various snack bars and restaurants. You're talking to people who ran the attractions. You're talking to the parking lot attendant, who was an 18-year-old teenage kid who with his friend's car got into an accident in the parking lot. You're talking to some of the people who were musicians who played with Duke Ellington or Benny Goodman, and they were young. They were maybe in their early 20s at the time. So all these people came forward. And in addition, people told me of other possibilities of where to look for information. And I found 5 more archives around the country that had Freedomland material that I didn't know existed initially. And one was so close, it was the Mystic Seaport Museum. And the reason why they had a huge collection, a huge file of correspondence and background material is that on City Island, there used to be a number of shipbuilding yacht yards, shipbuilding companies going back to the early 1900s. One of them, when it closed and sold, all their historic material was donated to Mystic Seaport. They built a number of the boats that were at Freedom Land. So I found all that correspondence and all the an actual blueprint of one of the boats was in the file. Another exciting find we had was out in California at one of the universities. The landscapers of Freedom Land had all their files of everything they did landscaping for at this university archive. And the reason why a California company did the landscaping for Freedom Land is because this company originally did the personal landscaping at the house of Walt Disney. Walt Disney then hires them to landscape Disneyland. C.V. Wood, the builder of Freedom Land and these other parks, knew them based on his relation with them, trusted them, and said, you will landscape the other parks I'm developing. So he brings them to New York to actually do the landscaping while subcontracting some of the landscape work to a company that still exists in Scarsdale. And also as a consultant was one of the major international botanists at the time who was affiliated with the New York Botanical Garden. So you now start seeing all these tentacles going out. You research it, and I said, well, now I have to go to the Botanical Gardens. And they had some information in their files about their botanists working with the landscapers at Freedom Land. So you just start putting the pieces together like a puzzle. And that's what developed the second book. And I think I could have made it twice the size that it was, but we did have to do some edits on things. We do have, I do have some original correspondence in the second book, especially with the boats that went from the designers to the park management. It's just a sampling. I could have placed in maybe about another 30 pages of correspondence, but you had to pick and choose what made the best sense. And also from that, I found out where Freedom Land's first office was in the Bronx, and I walked past this building because, as I say, I grew up outside near the park, right outside. I walked past this building a million times for 8 years, going to grammar school, going to church, going to my CYO summer day camp. And I never knew Freedom Land had started as a sublet in this little commercial building that still stands today. Because they needed to be only like 5 minutes away car ride from where they were actually building the park. So you start putting all these together and looking through old records, old newspaper clips, and you start piecing everything together.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's been a fun adventure.
It really sounds like, and what a fascinating story. I'm all of the different, participants and the people who shared their remembrances with you really illustrates how it seems like running a theme park was sort of like running a small city in and of itself.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
because you had everything from as I say, from parking lot attendants up to whoever did the equipment at the what we called the Moon Bowl, which was the outdoor sound stage where the performers appeared, to maintenance people who had to manage the various attractions. So it was like running a small city. Yeah.
You mentioned before some of the celebrity guests and the character actors. Could you talk a little bit more about what entertainment would have been like at the park? Why were these guests brought in, and what sort of things did they do when they were there?
When Freedom Land opened in 1960, they did have the character actors there. And what they would normally do that first year, and they did it maybe the second and third year also, is in addition to the character actors who were a suffragist in the little old New York section. They would have been the cowboys and the Indians for the shootout in the Wild West. You had a pirate with a peg leg in the New Orleans section. You had a few astronauts walking around in what we called Satellite City, which was the future of space travel. So you had character actors walking throughout the park, or uh, uh, performing in the park, not on necessarily on a time frame, but a shootout would break out spontaneously, and all of a sudden a crowd would be drawn. It wasn't as scripted as it was at parks, as it is at parks today. And especially the cowboys, a lot of them were Hollywood stuntmen who had been in westerns. So they would just have to talk to each other a little bit to say, I'm wearing the black hat today, I'll wear the white. And the next day they might change, but they knew what they wanted to do. They knew how to do the falls if they were shot or how to fall off a horse. They already knew this because they hired talented people to be these character actors. After the first season, and Freedomland was a smash that first year, they brought in a new vice president and general manager because they realized while the children would love to come back for all these adventures, the second year, the third year, etc., the teenagers, I went once, I don't need to go again. Or the younger adults, the 20-somethings or to 30-year-olds who may be newly married or so. All right, I saw it once, I don't need to go back. You needed a reason to bring them back in. So they hired a person who had a lot of connections in the entertainment field. So he brought in the children's TV hosts that we knew in New York, such as a Chuck McCann, a Sonny Fox, Claude Kirshner. He would bring them in for kids' entertainment. He also brought in a lot of the big bands, the Duke Ellingtons, Count Basie, Harry James, to attract the older adults, the 30-somethings, because that was their music era coming out of World War II. But then he also wanted to bring back the older teenagers. So you brought in people such as Paul Anka, the Four Seasons, and the list goes on. The list goes on and on. You had, for those who want the more mellow music, you had Steve Lawrence, Eddie Gourmet. You would have Terry Stafford, Johnny Clanton, all the major heartthrob singers that the girls would swoon over at the time. But you also had someone like Louis Armstrong would be brought in for a week at a time. You had more than 150 celebrity singers and musicians at the park during pretty much from the first year, but not so many in the first year. It was more in the succeeding years. But you also had actors and actresses coming into the park in order to draw the adults in again and again and again, in addition to the music. A lot of the adults, and I know my mom was so into, the movies and who was on television. I mean, she would get attracted when she would hear that Debbie Reynolds was going to be in the park, not to perform, but Debbie Reynolds probably was paid a per diem fee for the day to stroll through the park, to talk to the people, to take pictures, to sign autographs. So you had Debbie Reynolds, Hugh O'Brien, who played Wyatt Earp on television. You had Henry Fonda.
Wow.
Eddie Albert, who was a big movie star before my generation got to know him as the guy on Green Acres. So you had these actors coming in, and sometimes they would, when they came in, they would interact with the cowboys or something and create a little crowd. But they were really there to talk to the people, shake hands, sign an autograph, take a picture. But it was a way to say, come see Henry Fonda at Freedomland this Saturday. And it would get all the Henry Fonda fans to come in. It was a way to draw more people into the park.
Oh, interesting.
One funny episode, and I as much as Kathy Lennon had told me about their experiences at the park, and they said, "Oh, we went on all the attractions during our break time." She goes, they were, what were they? Maybe they were 18, 19, 20 at the time, so they enjoyed the park as well as performing there. She never told me that they had a little tussle with the Cowboys. I guess it was something that may have escaped them. I came into this collection about 2 years ago from a fellow who was a musician. He's also had bit parts in TV shows over the course of 30 years. And one of his friends was one of the stuntmen who was a cowboy of Freedomland. But in his estate sale, someone found this book of all pictures of the stuntmen and the cowboys at Freedomland. And in it were 3 photos of the Lennon sisters having a gun duel and a fight in the corral with the cowboys. So I contacted Kathy once again through her manager, and I said I have this. I sent it to him. She sent me an email back. Lord, she says, I had forgotten all about it. She said, I showed it to my sisters. We now remember doing this, and thank you so much for these photos.
Oh, my gosh, it really is like such a nice illustration of, sort of a collaborative, all of the people who remembered this park or who had visited either as guests, special guests or patrons were also very involved in the story and very passionate about their remembrances and sharing them with you. And
Yes. One fascinating story is I found out that this woman had worked at the park. It came through another person who had worked there, said, I worked with this woman. I've lost touch with her over the years. She goes, but she lives on Long Island. No, or the last time I knew she lived on. So I did a little research and I found out she lived in Levittown. I said, well, I don't like it. We figured she was about 89, 90 years old at the time. I didn't really want to just call cold because I didn't know what her status was, right? So I sent the letter. Had the address. I typed up the letter. I mailed the letter. About 3 or 4 days go by after the letter, maybe a week or so, and she calls me. She says, Mike, I received your letter. She goes, I haven't thought of Freedomland in such a long time. She said, I showed it to my daughter. She was here a couple of days ago. And because I explained what I was doing. I had written a book. I was working on a second book. And she said, my daughter urged me to call you. I didn't know if my story, was important to you. Well, my daughter said, do it. Just talk to him. She says, do you mind if my husband picks up the other line? Find out their story is absolutely wonderful. She was about 30 when she was working in the park, and she was selling tickets near the train station for the train ride that went around the park. And she said, I really didn't hang out after my shift was over because most of the kids were college students or high school students. The college students would all hang out together. They might go out to a bar afterwards. On their off days, she said they would go to Jones Beach, a group of them. She goes, but I was so much older than them. I really didn't have anyone to hang out with. She said, so, as we got off duty or something, if I talked to anybody, it was to the train engineer, the train conductor, because they had to be older because you were working with, big equipment here. She goes, so I would talk to them. She said, so the one year that I think it's 1962, Hurricane Donna comes through New York, comes right up the coast through New York. The day of Hurricane Donna, the park is closed. Well, the hurricane passes through. This woman goes to the park thinking, I have to report to work. She gets to the park and they said, we're going to stay closed the second day. We've had some damage from the storm. We're going to clean it up. We're going to open the day after tomorrow. Why don't you go to payroll and get your check for the week, and we'll see you tomorrow. Well, when she goes to payroll, she sees one of the engineers who she knows, and he goes, well, I guess it's time to go home. He says, would you want to catch lunch? let's get a bite to eat. So they go to a restaurant not too far outside the park. And that's when she stops. She goes, Mike, that was our first date. And on the other line, my husband is the engineer. She says, we've been married for about almost 60 years. She goes, we have 5 children, some grandchildren. She says, our first daughter is the one that encouraged me to call you. She goes, and believe it or not, her name is Donna because we met and had lunch because of Hurricane Donna. I mean, what a
Oh
wonderful
my
story.
gosh.
That's the story. As I told everybody who contacted me or I reached out to, I said, your story would have been lost forever. Your children may not have even known it. Your grandchildren may not have known it. But now it's here. And not only for your family to know it and to pass those stories on. I said, you're part of this park that so many people enjoyed and loved. And this park has now, even though it survived only for 5 years, I've kind of put it back on the map
Mm.
in the amusement and theme park area so that it has its proper place for what was done there.
Mm.
So many of these people were just thrilled to be part of the story, that someone found their story interesting and kind of pushed the memory that had been in the back of their mind, kind of pushed it forward so we could write. And we have, as with this woman and her husband, we have other stories in that second book that are just, they're just fascinating of what people did at the park and who they knew and where they grew up and how they got a job at the park and some of the things they saw, that no one else knew.
Yeah.
So, it made for an interesting second book.
Nice. That is kind of the beauty of combining like the intense archival work with like these remembrances that people had, because you get, the decisions of the great men and like the things that are the textbook history of the park,
Right.
but then those very human moments that otherwise would be lost
That-
are really beautiful.
And that's what history is. It's a story. It's her story, his story, and it's the history is made by people. So this park being an American history theme park about our past, but these people who worked at the park, and I also include in both books a lot of memories from guests who were children at the time, something they remembered. They're part of the book too, because that's the story of the park.
Oh,
So
so lovely.
yeah.
So what is next for you? You said you had a lot of material you had to cut. Do you think you're going to come back to it?
I don't know if I have it in me to do a third book on that. We will see on that. But right now, what I am doing is new things and new photographs that are found. I do put on the social media. So we continued the story there. Yes, we go back and delve into things that have already been published in the books. But the new photos that are found, the new stories, or someone reaches out to me with a memory, we will put it on social media. So I have Facebook, X, Instagram, and Pinterest. I figure some people don't like Facebook, some people don't like X, but some people really like Pinterest. So
Yep.
I figured let's do that wide range. I'm not venturing into what the young people do, TikTok. I'm not going that far
Yeah.
yet. But as an example, a woman just reached out to me about a month ago that she remembered the singer Jack Jones. For people who don't know Jack Jones, do a little research, find out who he is. He was a very popular, a standard music singer I would say from the late 50s through maybe like the 80s and 90s. He only passed away about a year ago. And she said that she and her girlfriend, who were, I think she said they were about 17 at the time, loved Jack. He was a very handsome man, and they just loved him. They went to see him at Freedomland, and he sang a popular song in the early 60s, Lollipops and Roses. It was a huge song at the time. And so they brought a bouquet of roses and lollipops. And as he came on stage, they got close and handed it to him. And she says, "That has been my thrill of meeting a celebrity my whole life." Well, that's an interesting story. That, yes, I knew Jack Jones was there. I have documented his appearances at the park. But to have her little story that she and a girlfriend brought a bouquet of roses and lollipops, that just adds to the flavor of what people did when they were at Freedom Land. And I always when she told me that story, now I would say she's about like 76 now, all right? And she also had said to me, she goes, "Oh, I haven't really told this to anyone." She goes, "I better tell my grandchildren. They'll probably look at me funny that I was this giggly teen after this singer." And I said to her, I said, "I always remember what my mother had told me, that we were children too. We were teenagers too. We did the same goofy things." As my mother always said, I was gaga over Frank Sinatra. She said, when I was 16, she said, we wrote the same silly notes and everything that everyone does. And it was just wonderful that she was willing to share that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it created more moments to share with her family and sort of connect.
Right, because now that we had it up on social media a day or two ago, and I had notified her what day it would go up so she could see it on Facebook, so she could share it, not only with those that follow her on Facebook, but she could share it with her children, her grandchildren, whatever, and say, "Look at grandma."
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, that's fun. Those are interesting stories that have really fun endings to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming and telling some of those stories.
Sure.
It's been fascinating to hear. And listeners, please check out FREEDOMLAND USA. Check out the definitive history and also the more definitive history. You might as well read both at this point. And I'm going to drop the links to your social media in the show notes so that people can find that too.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you again for joining
Sure,
us.
Jen.
And it is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.